Why don't we dive into some names that I think hammer home the point that Mike is making right now?
I think that's a great idea. Let's do that. We'll talk about first and foremost whether or not these are lineup locks or lineup knots. Let's start with Tony Pollard taking on the Chargers this week. That's the first bit of negative news, taking on the Chargers, because they are very tough.
Only bit of negative news, though,
honestly,
right?
It feels like it. Did you know that only 2 weeks outside the top 22 at the position, he has been sneaky good across the board, if you had not realized, with Tony Pollard, or if you put it another way, 6 weeks with at least 14.7 fantasy points.
Did you see, so this is the second straight week in which a member of the Titans coaching staff, Brian Callahan yesterday, Nick Holtz, their offensive coordinator last week, talking about how, we've got to be really smart about our usage with Tony Pollard. We got to scale him back, got to be mindful of that. That was last week leading into the game against the Patriots. We could see some Julius Chestnut. Tony Pollard had a total of 31 opportunities.
That's not a lot. Scaling it back.
Seems like a lot. And since, obviously no Tajay Spears for a few weeks here now, and it's like, Tony Pollard just continues to play over 80% of the snaps. 22 opportunities 3 games ago, 24 2 games ago, 31 a game ago. Like, I did not have on my 2024 bingo card that Tony Pollard was going to be amongst the best workhorse backs in the NFL, right? Like, I thought that was not in his bag based off what we saw last year in Dallas. It felt like, hey, square peg, round hole. Tony Pollard's at his best to play. And I'm not trying to say that Jahmyr Gibbs doesn't have more than him, but I think Jahmyr Gibbs, Etienne, these guys who are so expertly managed are such game changers, but usually in that 12 to 16 touch range, and it brings out the very best version of them.
Yeah, a ton of volume. To your point, he's top 8 in carries and targets at running back this season, but he only has 3 touchdowns. His offense hasn't been very good. His efficiency has not been great by any means. And you talked about his floor, which has been fine. I mean, you get a ton of volume. That's going to give you a decent floor in fantasy. He has no ceiling, though. He has no weekly finishes better than 12th this year. So he's not giving you a top 10 week so far this season. And you mentioned it. This is a tough matchup against the Chargers. 2 touchdowns allowed, the second fewest fantasy points. No running back has reached 19 points against them so far this season. So combine that matchup with Tony Pollard, and you're like, there's no ceiling here with him. So I would not call him a lineup lock in this matchup. Because of the strength of the position. That's part of it. There's a reason he's ranked 25 for me this week, but he's still a flex option. He's a decent floor. He's going to get you to double digits, but just not much more than that.
Field, you had mentioned Tajay Spears not playing the last couple of games, dealing with a hamstring injury. Was limited in practice yesterday, so we'll continue to see whether or not we might see Tajay Spears out there, which would potentially take away a handful of carries or touches and opportunities.
It was not a split when he was playing, but it was much more than
closer than
right now.
Yeah.
Shoot, man, it has been the Tony Pollard show of late.
For sure. All right, let's talk about Najee Harris. Yeah. Najee Harris, the next one up here, whether or not he's a lineup lock or a lineup not. Taking on the Washington Commanders. Washington's been mid-pack against the running back so far this year, Mike, but it does feel like this backfield has belonged to Najee Harris. Jaylen Warren is the clear and distant RB2. We thought this might be a little bit closer. But coming into this week, do you feel like they might get either Jaylen Warren more involved, or you're worried about the defense he's going up against?
Yeah, I would say that with Warren healthy now the last 3 weeks, it's been a lot closer. But I think Harris has actually been right at or a little below, or I think he's just a hair above 50% of the snaps over the last 3 weeks. So you're seeing some more Jaylen Warren now that he's healthy. But Harris still 16-plus touches in every single game so far this season, at least 100 yards and 16 fantasy points in 3 straight. Yeah. The Steelers have the hardest remaining schedule for running backs, so that's a reason why you might want to consider moving him before your fantasy league's trade deadline, but it's not that bad this week. Washington shuts down the passing game with running backs, but they're allowing 5.2 yards per carry to the position. That is highest in the NFL. That sets up perfect for Harris, who does most of his damage on the ground. So I think he's fine this week. I would lean towards him as a lineup lock. I think for this week, if I had him, he has to be in my lineup. But after that, I might want to field some offers.
You know what's kind of nice about Najee Harris this year? He's been much more explosive than years past. Mm-hmm. He's just been a better football player. That could be it. He's up to a career high. This is not a monster number, but he's up to a career high 4.4 yards per carry. That's over a half yard better than prior seasons from Najee, when he has been in the range of 3.8 yards per carry. So that's been good. He has 6 runs of at least 20 yards already this year. How many do you think he's had in his first 3 seasons combined? So we've got a half a year left, more than half a year left for Pittsburgh.
I'm going to say 16.
He has 6. How many
6
yards?
This season of 20-plus yards.
Oh, man.
3 full seasons prior to this.
I would say 8.
15. Good guess by Daniel.
Hey, all right.
So, and again, are those things a guarantee to happen every single week? No, but in prior years, you needed like the elite of the elite volume, at least the past 2 years. Because remember, as a rookie, Najee caught passes like literally every third play for the Steelers offense. The past 2 years, part of why the ceiling really decreased for Najee was because if he didn't get like 30 touches, he was, flex city. This year, because of that explosive gear that we've seen more frequently than prior years, even if he's not touching the ball 30 times in a game, he might turn 18 or 20 opportunities into, as Mike said, 3 straight games of at least 100 rushing yards with 2 rushing touchdowns in that 3-game stretch. There's one thing and one thing only that makes me nervous for this week, Najee Harris. It's if the Commanders jump ahead in this game early. And if they jump ahead in this game early, it's going to be the Jalen Warren show. Would be good news for George Pickens, not so good news for Najee.
Harris. I think that makes a ton of sense. This team is averaging 29.5 points over the last 3 games. Their offense has just been a lot better, but Najee Harris still only 2 touchdowns on the season, which still is crazy to me. When you're a 6'1", 240-pound back, and you're not being utilized better at the goal line, that's a tough one for me.
Well, they had Justin Fields under center for a lot of that time, right?
And I know he stole a handful.
Past 3 games, 2 rushing touchdowns for Najee, so perhaps trending up. A reminder of something I said yesterday, Steelers Commanders over-under 44.5. That's the highest for any Steelers game so far.
That's crazy.
This
That's
season.
The highest.
Yeah, would not surprise me if they have more games like that because, as I mentioned, 2 games against the Ravens, 2 games against the Bengals, a game against the Chiefs, a game against the Eagles going forward, and then a game against the Browns somewhere in there as well. But a lot of opportunities for higher scoring Steelers game in their final 9 efforts.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about another running back here. Taking on the Chicago Bears, that's Ramondre Stevenson, who, again, to me, you may not have recognized this, but he's been a top 7 running back in 3 of his last 4 games and a touchdown in all 3 of those games that he was at least a top 7 running back field. We've talked about a handful of times what this offense looks like with Drake May under center, how it's starting to make that tick up, right? They're starting to get a little bit better. Honestly, from a fantasy perspective, Ramondre has been crushing it more often than not for fantasy.
Yeah, he's
recently.
close. He's on the border here for me. He's just outside my top 20. You mentioned the last 4 games. Over the past 2 weeks, he's the highest scoring running back in all of fantasy.
Yeah,
over
why?
The small sample size. Because he scores touchdowns.
Multi-touchdown
touchdowns in both games.
Yeah.
So here are the good things we have going for Ramondre Stevenson. The volume is ridiculous right now. And they either don't trust Antonio Gibson anymore, which, shocker that Antonio Gibson is just a guy, right?
Yeah.
There's a reason. Anyways.
He split snaps with Jermichael Hasty last week. He was just,
Not to re-vet out, paying Antonio Gibson this offseason, but, that might be one where if they could do it all over again, they might do it a different way.
CMC Light? Is that what you're talking about?
A CMC Light, that's correct. However, he's got a career low, does Ramondre, in terms of both yards per rush and yards per catch. He is the volume king, but he has a pretty darn good bet in games in which they can be relatively competitive to see 20-ish opportunities. He's also going to get the goal line work for them.
Yep.
Every week, the Patriots talk about needing to run the football better. They usually don't run the football better, and they usually allow the other team to run the football really, really well against them. But, the things that you need for Ramondre Stevenson to stay in your lineup are really good volume and good opportunities near the goal line. Both of those should be in his favor once again this week. So he's just outside my top 20, but darn close to being a lineup block.
Yeah, I think, it's close as well. 2.2 yards per carry since he's come back from injury in 3 games. The efficiency there has been really poor, but, he's scoring touchdowns. He has 7 in 8 games so far this season. And the Bears defense is good against the pass, not as much against the run. 5.1 yards per carry, that's 4th highest, and they're in the upper half in fantasy points allowed to running backs as well.
And
so
Andrew Billings, probably their best run stuffer, just went down for the year, so that's no good for the Bears. And also the Patriots game script, right? We've seen the Bears play well offensively. Of late, they haven't suggested this is going to be a game in which, it's 31-7 in the 3rd quarter, and all of a sudden the Patriots have to throw the football every single play.
Yep. All right. With that being said, we still all have him inside our top 22. So if he's not a lineup block, he's at least a flex.
Yeah, these first 3
probably starting him, I would say.
Yeah. These first 3 feel really close to me. You could have a scenario in which you just drafted really well, and you've got 2 better backs. But I think these guys are going to be in most lineups in 10 team.
Yeah, and our point here is kind of we're at I'm at 19, 22, and 25 in my rankings, and we're talking about guy had 31 touches last week, a guy that has 100-plus yards in 3 straight games, a guy that has 4 touchdowns in the last 2 games. We're talking about his flex options.
Yeah.
And if you look at all the guys ahead of them in our rankings, which we went through yesterday on the ranking show, or you could see at ESPN.com, you're going to be like, yeah, this actually checks out. It's just really strong right now.
Yeah. And we have, amongst others, no Kenneth Walker III this week. And these guys, so some
That's
of the
another
teams
part
are on a
of it,
bye,
too. Yeah,
right?
they're out too.
4 teams on a bye, and you still have some of these players that might be on your bench. Pretty crazy.
It is crazy. One guy that I would have thought in Week 10 would have been higher than what he is, Travis Etienne in this Jaguars backfield. Mike, I believe you mentioned this yesterday as a part of the bus conversation we have, taking on Minnesota, who will have the 5th fewest fantasy points to running back. And Travis Etienne just feels unstartable in this Jaguars offense. I don't think he's finished higher than RB20 this year, Mike. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, that's his best finish.
That's brutal. I mean, what are you doing now? If you've got Travis Etienne, I mean, you spent this draft pick, right? We're past the point, though, that, like, you can't really look back and be like, well, I invested this into him. At this point, I'm at the spot where if I cannot start Travis Etienne, I'm assuming I have a better running back on my roster. He's not only a lineup lock, but he's a desperation flex if that's what you need.
Yeah, agreed. And a tough matchup against Minnesota, 7th fewest fantasy points allowed. 3 running backs have reached 12 points against them so far this season, and he's in a committee. If you want a silver lining with him, it's the fact that he played like 12 of the first 13 snaps last week. They came out and said, you're back from injury, you're still our guy. He made a mistake, and he basically he played a little bit the rest of the game, but mostly was out. Maybe they do it again and give him another shot. Maybe he actually had like 24 yards and 3 carries in the game, so it's not like he was running horribly in that one. So maybe there's a chance he takes back 60% of the snaps and gets rolling at some point in the second half. It's possible, but they have a hard schedule, tough matchup this week. Tank Bigsby's playing well.
Might not have Trevor Lawrence.
It's hard to justify starting him this week.
It's tough, man, too. Like, I think we should do a show at some point. And this might be more of an off-season show than it is an in-season show, where it's like, because I don't want to like spend the entire segment like projecting what that player is going to be, but it's almost like on the couch therapy about like, so I drafted Travis Etienne, and he's a 24-year-old running back who was a first-round pick, who was 3rd in the NFL in touches last season. He got to the point by about week 6 of this season in which I did not know whether I should be starting or sitting him. We're also going to have like a tight end we'll talk about in, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes from right now, who fits into that same category. I just want to have like some therapy about those guys.
It sounds like ESPN minus.
Yeah, it does sound like a little bit of an ESPN minus.
Yeah, that would be good. Some fantasy therapy, right?
Phil thinks he just invented a concept that you invented.
No, so the other, like I've been workshopping that one. I also like so as I was planning about some of the guys that I wanted to start and wanted to sit this week, I was thinking about a column. I haven't quite gotten the sign off from the editors, but I was thinking like here are the players I love for this week. Here are the players that I hate.
Oh, sure, yeah.
You gotta do like love/hate or something.
Yeah, love/hate, right? Exactly.
Oh, good. All right.
Does anybody do that or no?
Not here.
Miss you, pal.
Recently. Yeah, we do miss you, buddy.
Do we wait? Okay, so that's been taken.
Yeah, I believe so. I think Ken Dobby right.
I was thinking like the players. You know how like on Tuesday nights we all put in our claims.
Yeah.
Like, we should do a column like waiver wire and then like tell people who they should pick up each week.
Right, and then when you get the player, you have to wave to them. So it's like you could spell it wave like W.
No, I wouldn't do that. I would just call it the waiver wire and then write about players to pick up on waivers.
You've always been not great at titling things, though, Mike. For what it's worth, your creativity is
waiver
lacking.
wire's not a good one. All right, I'll workshop it.
All right.
For what it's worth, in this Jaguars backfield where we talk about Travis Etienne not finishing inside the top 20 is his finish. 20th is his finish.
Yeah.
Knowing that his backup has an RB1 and RB8 finish under his belt, and Tank Bigsby just also doesn't feel great because it's a legitimate
Etienne,
backup.
Dynasty value. What is it? No one knows.
And by the way, Bigsby, but he's still like he's a non-factor in the passing game when Etienne plays. He had one game with a handful of targets when Etienne was out, but you can't start him either right now. Neither of these guys are.
Can't do it.
All right.
Mike Singletary.
Let's get one more, at least one more. That was, I didn't catch it at first, but then I was like, that's it. That is what it was.
Went deep there with the voice.
Yeah, you did. I liked it.
Can't do it.
I liked it. It felt like you had a little facial hair there for a minute.
That I don't.
There's a little bit. I see a little. I can see the outline there.
If you just let it go this offseason for like 2 weeks, would it get any, would you get scruffy like Mike at all?
This is his playoff beard.
Stop.
It would not work.
I love it.
Really?
Oh, I would love to see it.
You have. No, you have.
Oh, yeah, this is my.
Yeah. You started in week 1. He stopped shaving after week 1. No time.
No time.
I mean, he's doing draft. He's working on the draft and fantasy. I mean, there's no
ET,
time.
Yeah.
ET.
Is there any chance that you could do like both Singletary and Harbaugh having a conversation back and forth where you just play both of the roles? Oof. Maybe we'll think about that. Workshop that one as well while you're workshopping some segments. Let's see if we can figure that out. All right, one more bit of running back news that we have here. Brian Robinson taking on the Pittsburgh Steelers. For what it's worth, he was a last-minute scratch. I found out during Only Dan's on Fantasy Football Now from Dan Graziano.
It's a great segment.
It is a pretty good segment. That one has been a lot of fun this year. But Graz let us know last minute he was not going to roll last week. Became the Austin Eckler show. Brian Robinson Jr. was limited at practice yesterday, so we're going to continue to monitor that as well. Assuming that he plays, taking on the Pittsburgh Steelers field, how are you approaching Brian Robinson? Is he a lineup lock, or is he somewhere outside that top 20, more of a flex consideration?
Yeah, he's another guy that's close to that top 20. There's a party that says to yourself, like, how can you not start this guy when he's got 6 rushing touchdowns in 7 games this season? He also feels like one of the best bets to get a goal line or an inside the 5 carry in the NFL right now. Not just because he's a really good power back, but also the Commanders score on basically as many, like the highest percentage of their drives of any team in the NFL right now. On the other hand, if he doesn't score, you might be in trouble because there's a chance he's limited because of this injury. Does not get 20 carries, but gets maybe more like 12 or 14. And he has 1 catch in his last 3 games.
That's not good.
So, yeah.
You know what this reminds me of a little bit? I just thought of this while you were talking. Is like a little bit like Gus Edwards last year. You know, he saw all that goal line work and scored all them touchdowns, but it was just a 0 in the passing game. And you're right, Robinson, 79 receiving yards so far on the season. And 14.5 carries per game. That's not a massive number by any means, but he does have 6 touchdowns in 7 games. But yeah, the upside is not there. Sometimes these things sneak up on you. He has 0 top 10s this week. It's kind of like last week, someone was in my mentions on X, like how could you guys not rank Jahmyr Gibbs higher every week when he's top 5 every week? He has 1 top 9 this season.
What's
Gibbs
X?
finished top 9 one time. I don't know. It's some sort of social media platform I use because I have more followers than you because you don't know about it. So
I'm a blue sky guy.
I was just going to say
you
he
can
can
sign
get
up
you
and
an
have more
invite
than
code.
us in like 5 seconds.
Stop.
That's so
But
good.
anyway, tough matchup against the Steelers. So I mean, if he plays again, he's much like Ramondre and like Najee and Pollard, who we talked about. You're probably starting him, but I wouldn't say a lineup lock for sure. By the way, if he sits again, Austin Eckler, RB2. You know, he was fine last week. He scored a touchdown early. He actually did most of his damage in the first half, and he seemed like he was on his way to a huge game, and then his playing time kind of cooled in the second half for sure.
Let's say that he doesn't go. If for some reason we find out that Brian Robinson doesn't go, we see Austin Eckler again. Austin Eckler.
Okay, so you just weren't listening to anything I was saying.
Oh, I'm so sorry. You're right. I was trying to figure things out here.
No, what happened was I actually take Daniel off the hook there because Daniel had an autoplay on his computer.
I did.
Like the music
I pulled up the
started rolling.
rankings
He's like,
for the
That
next
wasn't an
segment.
autoplay. I
Abandon ship. How do I turn this off, but also sort of pay attention to Mike at the
That
same
was my
time?
bad.
started
That was my
talking,
bad.
and then he was like, I don't care, and he started watching videos on YouTube.
You know, I feel
Let me go.
bad about
He was
that.
trying to find my blue sky profile. He's like, immediate follow, please.
I'm like,
No,
Austin, I just had this whole speech about what to do if Robinson's out with Eckler.
Okay, but now what if I've got Brian Robinson Jr. on my roster and I need it? All right, so I'll ask you again after
Start
the show.
Chris
Maybe
Rodriguez,
I'll watch the
okay? That's what you do. No one else should, but you should start Chris.
Actually, don't start Chris Rodriguez because the guy's been on the team for like 3.5 years. They traded for Marshawn Lattimore and immediately gave him Chris Rodriguez's number. Did you guys see that?
No, seriously? Oh gosh.
So I don't know what number Chris Rodriguez is now wearing, but it's no longer 23. Yeah.
All right, that's gonna do it for running backs.